Today, Victory News contributor attorney John Graves will be with us, millionvoices.org, and one of our favorites, WallBuilders, David Barton, will be with us as well. Mike, let's get this thing started with a look at today's news.
Well, two more of attorney Sidney Powell's lawsuits challenging the election results from November 3rd have been rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. According to the Epoch Times, the justices didn't offer any comment today when they announced the dismissal of the cases. The suits in question were initially filed in Arizona and Wisconsin. Back to you, Greg.
Thanks, Mike. So disappointing. I want to bring David Barton in here. One of the things yesterday in the president's speech, it was themed America Uncanceled. It seems that the Supreme Court keeps canceling cases that seems to be in their jurisdiction as they come before him. And he was pretty harsh with them yesterday. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's not that the cases just seem to be in the jurisdiction. They are in the jurisdiction. Explicit language in the Constitution. Some of the cases were filed because the language of the Constitution makes that a straight to the Supreme Court issue. And so while we have complained of judicial activism with previous generations of judges taking things not in the Constitution and making up their own policies over it, now we have a serious case of judicial passivism, is they're not taking things that are in the Constitution and upholding them, which has the same effect as taking unconstitutional policies and nationalizing them because you're not upholding the Constitution. So it's a real problem seeing what's coming out of the courts. And the same with, as Kevin said, as Majority Leader, well, actually now Minority Leader McCarthy said, only 9% of that bill goes to COVID. It's interesting, though, what you're seeing here is another process. And I like to harp on process a lot because a lot of time people don't pay attention to the process. They only see the results. The Bible tells us in 1 Timothy that you don't get crowned unless you run according to the rules. You have to know the rules. And Democrats have gone years and they have not proposed a federal budget. And the reason is they get to a government shutdown and they put everything in it that they want. So the things that they are getting done here, that subway thing he said for Santa Clara County, that never would have been done if it had gone straight to a vote on the floor with either Democrats or Republicans. But if you stick it in the COVID relief bill, it's going to get done. They put more money into Obamacare. They put more money in education. They're putting more money into the National Endowment of the Arts, putting more money into illegal immigrants, things that would not stand if they were to vote on them in a real budget.
One of the things the president yesterday, former president, said is he was laying out a case for election reform, but not coming from the federal government. He was really pointing to the states, that each state needs to handle this. And he laid out 4 or 5 things here, and I will go over them real quick. One, election day, that we're not voting 2 weeks later, end mail-in voting, a voter ID, and chain of custody for every single ballot. It seems sensible.
Yeah, it does seem sensible, which is why it's going nowhere in blue states. They have resisted all of these proposals for a number of years. These are not new proposals. Even in talking to legislators in Georgia, where so much of the national attention was focused on election night, Georgia legislators said, look, we know there's been corruption and fraud in Georgia, but we never worried about it because we were winning the elections. Now we're losing elections and we want to do something, but they don't have the strength of numbers they've had before. So this has been an issue that's out there for a number of years. There are some states taking it seriously. Ron DeSantis in Florida, what he did 2 years ago in implementing those policies, common sense stuff. Florida is always a battleground state on election night. It wasn't this year. They were one of the first states in with a very clear win, not even close. So that's what happens when you get election policy implemented through. There's a lot of attempts going right now, and there's still a lot of time left in this legislative session in various states. So I think you're going to see several things come through, but not at the level that it should, where that every state should be protecting the integrity of the vote. Again, this is something we've seen blue states resist absolutely across the board. They want none of these policies, and that's very unfortunate for voters.
I want you to check this out. In California, Democratic lawmakers have introduced a bill that, if passed, would fine stores upwards of $1,000 who have a separate department for boys and girls instead of putting all the clothes together. This is the latest example of the left's insistence on placing an undue burden on America's youth to seemingly determine their sexual preference before they even hit puberty. Text from the bill even states that keeping similar items that are traditionally marketed either for girls or for boys separated makes it more difficult for the consumer to compare the products. It incorrectly applies that their use by one gender is inappropriate. If approved, this bill will go into effect on January 1st, 2020. 2023. Mike, pitch it to you.
Greg, in his first major post-presidential appearance, Donald Trump spent a good portion of his speaking time at CPAC going after the big tech censorship czars. During this speech, the former president said that big tech companies should face major penalties if they continue to censor conservative voices.
Republicans, conservatives must open up our platforms and repeal Section 230 liability protections. And if the federal government refuses to act, then every state in the union where we have the votes, which is a lot of them, big tech giants like Twitter, Google, and Facebook should be punished with major sanctions whenever they silence conservative voices.
Trump and his administration calling for the abolishment or reforms of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to remove liability protections for companies that engage in the censoring of political speech. For its part, the Justice Department has opened antitrust probes into major digital technology firms and have filed a lawsuit against Google over anti-competitive allegations. And the Supreme Court has spoken, and with their decision now in hand, worshipers in one California county can finally resume in-person church services for the first time since the pandemic began. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that a Ninth Circuit Court's previous ruling to keep the churches closed violated the First Amendment, and that the churches be reopened immediately as they await their appeal with the lower court. After the High Court's ruling, Santa Clara County said indoor worship services were permitted at 20% capacity, but other indoor gatherings are restricted, at least for now. Greg, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. John, I want to bring you in on this now. It appears that there seems to be two Californias. There's the California that wants to make sure that boys and girls clothing, or there's no two sections that are different, and then the California where churches can finally go back to church. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's also that exact same county, Santa Clara, is the one that has a community college with a 6'5", 200-plus-year-old man playing as a woman, a biological man playing as a woman at the community college there in Santa Clara. But they're also recalling the governor in California. They're that close to getting that done, and I fully expect that's going to happen later in this same year. There's good things happening, even though there's a massive battle raging. And you've got to remember, whether it's the presidential election, whether it's these states like Como in New York or California and the recall of Newsom, what's happening here is people are finally waking up, and the pendulum will swing because the enemy often overplays his hands, and then hopefully that'll wake a lot of people up. California is not a lost cause. I think there's a lot of good things happening there. There's a lot of good things happening across the country, but people have to stay engaged to discern and know what to do.
Yeah, a lot of people are voting with their feet. And I saw Governor DeSantis speaking over the weekend, and he talked about likening it to East Berlin, West Berlin. People are moving from East Berlin to West Berlin.
And I would point out, I love what David Barton said, if you look at what Florida did at the state level to clean up voter election integrity, you read off, Election Day is what President lined out, stop mail-in ballots that are unlimited, get a photo ID, and citizenship. There's also studies that have been out just recently that 7 out of 10 people, once they're educated against H.R. 1 and 4 election integrity, don't just support those 7 to 10, they also support signature verification, transparency and audits, and citizens voting, not illegal immigrants. And so to me, it was huge for the president to deal with that this weekend, because there's a lot of people. It doesn't matter if it's 2%, 5%, or 10% that are saying, I talked to people today, I don't want to vote unless I know the election is going to be honest and integrous. And, to me, the way I look at it, if we can send massive amounts of money through wiring and audit that and have an audit trail, why can't we do that with voting? There should be open transparency and honesty that both sides can do it so that no one's cheating.
Yeah, he brought you into this, David. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that. If you went to the Democratic convention.
But I will tell you there's some good news on the story you just covered with big tech. Just over the weekend, we had a decision come down from a federal judge that has hit Facebook for $650 million for violating privacy state laws in Illinois. Now, this is huge because we've all had questions on the legal side of, all right, Section 230, President Trump talked about, got to get rid of that because of big tech and censorship, but that's a federal law. So what can a state do with a federal law? Well, we saw this weekend a federal judge said, you know what, your state law here in Illinois, we're going to apply that against Facebook. Now, $650 million in one state. Now, you think about what's happening right now at the state legislative level. We have Florida's moving forward very aggressively on censorship laws against big tech. So is Texas, so is North Dakota, so is Kentucky, so is Oklahoma, so is Arkansas. You just start piling those states in there. And as President Trump said, just if you take the red states, I mean, that's a bunch of states. He was talking about election reform. But if you take that to big tech stuff, that is a massive pocketbook hit on those big tech guys. We've already seen 70,000 groups deplatformed by big tech since the election because they're in some way conservative or pro-life or pro-family, whatever. So this victory, I mean, that's a shot over the bow, and that could be a really big thing that we'll be reporting on in weeks to come.
Yeah. Okay, John, how do people push back? How do they get involved?
You know, I think at the state level, I want to echo what David is saying. It's not just Florida that's doing it. You had Attorney General Ken Paxton on, and what were the two things that he talked about? Election integrity and monopolies. So I would even say that these monopolies, these social media, which has really, along with the legacy media, become the marketing arm of the Democrat Party, they interfered in the election too by putting their finger on the scales.